The night of July 17th. From the moment I climbed into the Uber that night, a small part of me knew I was making a mistake. "You're in over your head," some nameless guardian angel whimpered in my ear. I, per usual, ignored it, but a glimpse through the thin metal blinds all but confirmed their divine intuition. There were dozens of mannequins lining the suburban street, none of which had been there when I entered the squat single-floor condo 5 minutes prior. Normally, I felt at home undercover. Experience brings comfort, and I was damn experienced. Played a lot of roles throughout the years: Colombian drug mule, distant cousin of a child pornography distributor turned senatorial candidate, financial consultant to a pair of gun-smuggling real estate tycoons. The list goes on and on and on. Something about this job was different. I scanned the road, searching for movement, assessing for threats. Everything was still. The sun crested under the horizon, and the streetlights blinked on, casting a hazy glow over the armada of inert, plastic figures. The more I looked, the more I saw a disturbing intentionality to the way they'd been positioned. When I arrived, the avenue had been buzzing with activity. An elderly couple enjoying the quiet summer evening, lounging in beach chairs and sipping iced tea on their well-trimmed lawn. Kids laughing and playing on a rickety swing set between two of the houses. A young man walking his dog on the sidewalk. Now, there were 2 mannequins seated in those beach chairs, lifeless fingers fastened around half-filled glasses. A smaller mannequin upright on a swing. Another mannequin, legs spread as if paused mid-step, holding a leash with no dog attached. It was like the entire block had been subjected to some temporary rapture, so God materialized a bevy of human-sized placeholders to avoid any unseemly cosmic mishaps when they were all eventually beamed back to Earth. Honestly, that would have been my preferable explanation. So what if I hadn't been rapture-ed? I could make do. I could fade into the background of an evolving hellscape. It'd just be a new role to play. One detail, however, made 2 things crystal clear. There'd been no rapture, and I'd be unable to fade into the background. Quite the contrary. I was the star of the show. Each and every mannequin had its eyes pointed towards the house I was in, even if that required its head to be turned at a neck-breaking 180-degree angle. I exploded back from the window at the sound of a mechanical kitchen timer alarming in the other room. According to Stavros, the owner of this fine establishment, that meant the game had started. Whatever this was, I'd willingly put myself in the middle of it. My guardian angel was right. I was in over my head. Interview 1. The Rookie. We think the first disappearance occurred on May 10th, 2025. Since then, the department estimates that about 40 people have gone missing, though the actual number may be much, much larger than that. You may find yourself asking, why do you need to estimate? How could you not know the exact number or precisely when the first disappearance was? All of which are very reasonable questions, and although I can't provide a fulfilling answer, I can summarize our predicament. We don't know who disappeared. We're just starting to discover the empty spaces they left behind. Allow me to elaborate. On May 10th, a pair of police officers, a rookie, and a more senior lawman arrived at the door of a luxury penthouse, 12 stories above the ground of my fair city. The rookie, eager to prove himself, knocked on the door and announced his intent to enter. There was a problem, though. He stumbled over his words. His tone lacked authority and confidence, and that wasn't simply a byproduct of his inexperience. Although he refused to admit it, the rookie couldn't recall why they were there. Not to say that he'd blacked out and couldn't remember the events that led up to that moment. They'd received a call from the dispatcher, drove towards downtown, parked outside a large apartment complex, greeted the clerk behind the front desk, took the elevator to the 12th floor, walked across the hall, and arrived at the penthouse. He knew that's where he intended to go, but the reason they'd been called evaded him. The way he described the situation was certainly interesting, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't cause a chill to slither up the back of my neck when I thought about it. He claimed it was like the memory had melted. "Could you explain?" I asked the rookie. The department had been kind enough to lend him to me before I was due to go undercover. I watched him closely. He pushed back a swath of frizzy, chestnut-colored hair, running his fingers across his scalp like a five-legged tarantula. His eyes darted around my office, seeking refuge from my stare. Eventually, the words sort of tripped out of his mouth. Like, it's still in there, the memory, I mean. He pointed to his forehead, which was becoming dappled with beads of sweat. Even now, when I think about that day, I know there's more. Missing pieces. But they've melted away. Vaporized into tiny, unintelligible fragments. Imagine an ice cream cake. He paused. The rookie's neck straightened. His eyes widened. After a few seconds, he whipped his head to the side, as if he were trying to catch someone sneaking up behind him. The man whispered something. It was barely audible above the ambient noise of the department, the stomping of feet, the chugging of our AC, the cacophony of other interrogations taking place in adjacent rooms. But I believe he said, "Can you hear that?" It wasn't clear what he was referring to, and when I asked him to repeat himself, he ignored me. Returning to his explanation, his speech had taken on a manic quality. There was an urgency to it. Something spooked him, and he wanted to be done with the interview as quickly as possible. Imagine an ice cream cake with a message written in frosting on top. It's 100 fucking degrees out, and you accidentally leave the box with the cake in the back of your car. By the time you realize you forgot it, it's too late. The heat disintegrated the whole thing. You can't see the message anymore, but technically it didn't go anywhere. The frosting is still in the box, it just melted. I wanted to press him further, but I held off. The topic seemed to irritate him. He left my office a few minutes later, his head swiveling from side to side as he hurried away. Paranoia made the rest of his interview fairly useless. Fortunately, I was scheduled to speak with his more senior counterpart next. The night of July 17th. Continuation. I exited the living room and bolted down the hallway, pushed along by the mechanical chirps of the ringing alarm. The kitchen wasn't much, but it looked newly renovated. Polished metal appliances and a varnished wooden table in the center. It stood in stark contrast to the outside of the home, with its peeling paint chips and splintered front porch. My eyes landed on the table, but it was empty. I turned my head and located the dull white egg timer perched atop the oven, adjacent to the cellar door. I twisted the dial, and the chirping died out. Undiluted silence crashed down around me. That wasn't where Stavros left the timer, was it? I could have sworn he left it on the kitchen table. When we walked in, he explained the rules of this so-called haunt. He set the timer to 5 minutes, placed it on the table, we shook hands, and then he left. I contemplated the dissonance as my gaze wandered around the room until it drifted to the cellar door and I felt my mind go blank. It was closed. Had it been closed before? Hadn't it been slightly ajar but certainly open? My chest began to feel heavy, like I'd swallowed liquid cement that was now rapidly solidifying, encasing my lungs in stone. "Breathe, man," I whispered to myself. The inhales were shallow at first, but became progressively more full and meditative. The cement in my chest dissolved. I started to think clearly. As I'd done on plenty of jobs before, I centered myself by reviewing the information I had at hand and reminding myself why I was there. I'm playing the role of a columnist for a local newsletter. This is some kind of extreme haunted house, but it's also apparently a game. Stavros claimed that if I stay in the house until daybreak, I don't necessarily win, but I don't lose either. If I leave early, however, then I lose. As I type this, I can't recall the penalty for losing. Anyway, I set the timer back down on the oven and began walking through the property, inspecting it for information that might help the department find those missing people, something I'd been doing prior to noticing the mannequins. Truth be told, there wasn't much I could glean that seemed helpful. The place was small and immaculately clean. The closets lining the hallway that connected the front and back of the house were empty. There wasn't anything other than a brown leather sectional in the living room. Once I'd done a lap around the first floor, I found myself once again at the foot of the cellar. I couldn't bring myself to put my hand on the knob. For better or worse, a new sound in the distance gave me an excuse to postpone that portion of my investigation. The sound was faint, and it seemed to encircle me, originating from multiple points in every direction. Singing, various voices, male and female, were projecting the same wordless melody towards the house. There was only one window to look for the source of the singing through, which brought me back to the living room. I dreaded seeing the mannequins again, but the feeling was marginally more tolerable than the sheer terror that the cellar inspired within me. When I peeled back the blinds, however, I instantly regretted the choice. The road was now invisible, cloaked by a thick blanket of moonless night. The streetlights had been turned off. I could only see 2 feet in front of the house, which meant I couldn't tell if all the mannequins were still there, and the ones closest to the house appeared to have slightly changed positions. The singing grew louder and more fervent. My hand shot into my pocket. It was time to call for an evac. They could label me a coward, or fire me. I'd happily suffer the social and financial repercussions if it meant getting the fuck out of that house. All I could find was a few bits of lint and dead air. I tried my other pocket. No phone. I patted myself down from head to toe. Nothing. Did I leave it in the Uber? Did Stavros manage to lift it off me? The creaking of the cellar door halted my frenzied search. I spun around and faced the hallway. Fear crackled behind my eyes like steam inside a popcorn kernel. A face peered around the corner. A face with no visible neck, only a foot above the floor. Its movement was unnaturally smooth and fluid, gliding with a perfect horizontal motion. Its expression was stoic and unchanging. There was something black and wriggling behind the face. Multiple somethings. A group of dark sausages floating in the air. That's when it finally clicked. It wasn't a person's face. It was a mask attached to the back of someone's hand, and that hand was covered by black fabric. The person who'd be hiding in the cellar lurched fully into view. Their entire body was uniformly clothed in black fabric. The fabric was littered with masks, up the arms, across the torso, down the legs, over the top of their feet, on their head. And it was all the same exact face, wearing an identical expression, on the front and the back and the sides of their body, everywhere it could fit. They crept into the hallway. They needed to lower their actual head to fit under the frame. There was a pause. I couldn't move. They rushed forward, sprinting at me, masks clattering against each other. I angled my elbow at the corner of the window and sent it crashing into the glass. Before my consciousness could catch up with my body, I was leaping out the window and racing across the lawn, dodging mannequins as I went. The farther I ran, the louder the singing became. But the clattering of the masks was never too far behind. Interview 2. The senior officer. Essentially, we both pretended to know what we were doing at that penthouse door. Neither of us wanted to look like a dunce in front of the other. Sort of funny, thinking back on it now. The senior officer put a hand on his beer gut and let out a hearty, so vigorous that it almost seemed forced, laugh. I smiled politely. He settled quickly once it became clear I wasn't laughing along. His eyes narrowed, and he spoke again, his voice stripped of its previously playful veneer. Humor is important, son. It's a ward, keeps the devil at bay. In an effort to save face, I obliged his unstated request and forced my own meager chuckle. Thankfully, that seemed to be enough. The grizzled man relaxed, leaning back in his chair and shooting me a toothy grin, incisors stained a fetid-looking white-brown from years of chewing tobacco use. He continued his recollection of that day where the rookie left off. Management brought up a skeleton key at their request and let them inside the locked penthouse, which was empty. But there were signs of fairly recent habitation, like a plate of food in the microwave, still warm to the touch. That said, the luxurious multi-story condo was apparently a goddamned icebox. Sure, it was the middle of the summer, so it made sense to have the AC on, but the place was painfully cold. The frigid air bit and clawed at our skin. We checked the air conditioning and, strangely, found it to be turned off. So why then did it feel like we were slogging through some freezing tundra? It was an anomaly, he remarked. The deeper the officers went, the more anomalies they encountered. For example, they could have sworn they heard the wispy vocalizations of someone singing as they went further into the penthouse, past the cavernous living room and down the first-floor hallway. They followed the ethereal hum until they arrived at an entertainment room. Although the lights were off, a massive plasma screen TV intermittently illuminated the space with its shimmering glow. By the time they were standing in the doorway, the singing was no longer audible. Entering the room, the rookie immediately slipped and fell. There was a viscous substance coating the tile floor. When I flicked the overhead bulbs on, the stuff was everywhere. On the walls, the ceiling, the electronics. Everything had received a few splotches. Its color was like spoiled milk mixed with charcoal, ashen with swirls of black. Despite looking like some sort of alien mold, it didn't have a scent. Didn't really feel like anything to the touch neither. My handler, the person who briefed me on the assignment, let it slip that the substance bore a chemical similarity to crude oil, with some key differences. She wouldn't tell me anything beyond that. So why couldn't you determine who'd gone missing? Surely there must have been something within the condo that could identify who'd been living there, I asked. The officer's uncle, who had a few too many cocktails at Thanksgiving, overly sociable demeanor seemed to once again falter. His tone became deep and grave. Well, son, the horrible truth is, there was. We found plenty of framed photographs, a wallet with a driver's license, unopened bills that needed to be paid. But no one, and I mean no one, could agree on what they're seeing when we all reviewed the evidence. I tilted my head and furrowed my brow. That said, I wasn't confused. I'd already been briefed on the anomaly. The expression was entirely performative. People are likely to give you more when they think you're riveted. Everyone loves a captive audience. To me, the pictures were blank. Others, though, saw a man they didn't recognize. The rookie even saw some kaleidoscopic ripples of color within the frames, if you can believe that. The same principle applied to the driver's license photo, and the words on the license, illegible. Scrambled letters of different sizes and fonts under the laminated surface, uniquely jumbled depending on the beholder. Of course, they asked who was on the lease. The answer? No one. No records of anyone having lived there for at least a few years. Since then, the police had discovered a handful of other abandoned homes with the same constellation of anomalies. That's how the department calculated its estimated number of missing persons. 10 deserted homes, and the square footage averaged out to 3.8 missing people per home, which was rounded up to 4. The last, and potentially the most harrowing claim the senior officer made was this. Obviously, it isn't a leap to imagine the true number of disappearances may be much higher. No one's filed any missing person reports in relation to the abandoned properties. What I'm getting at is this. How can you accurately quantify the loss of people that nobody remembers existed in the first place? The night of July 17th, continuation. The asphalt crunched under my feet. I reached the sidewalk and sprinted past the mannequin holding a leash with no dog attached. Its face was identical to the masks clattering behind me as the nameless person gave chase. It wasn't just some factory standard death mask either. It was much more specific than something you'd see on a run-of-the-mill CPR dummy. However, for your safety, I will provide no further details. I weaved through a few more mannequins scattered on the lawn and dashed into a narrow alleyway separating two houses on the opposite side of the street. Up ahead there was a forest. That's where I'll lose them, I thought. Close-set trees covered the rough, uneven ground. Clusters of tangled roots and stray, decaying crab apples threatened to send me tumbling to the earth as I scrambled through the thicket. I did not peek over my shoulder to see if they were gaining on me. That felt like a surefire way to crack my skull when I collided with an unseen tree trunk. No, I kept my eyes fixed forward and tracked their distance from me via the clattering. Slowly it became quieter, and although that was a relief, another sound was keeping me on edge. The deeper I descended into the forest, the louder the singing got. It wasn't a chorus anymore. Instead, I heard a woman's voice in isolation, and there was something off about it. The voice sounded frayed, tinny, and laced with static. Must be a recording. But there was something else amiss. From within the house, the melody sounded sweet, a tune you'd sing to an infant to help them off to sleep. Closer to the source, however, it sounded harsh, practically atonal, almost like a scream instead. I didn't mean to follow the sound, not consciously at least. My gut just told me it was the right way to go. The interstate was on the other side of the forest, in the direction I was running. But when I came across the massive speaker, the origin of that nebulous song, I don't have a great explanation for why I stopped moving. I was tired, but I certainly wasn't exhausted. Minutes before, I'd found the noise and its fluctuating nature distressing. Now, however, the mood was shifting. Its aura was different. Approaching it made my fear float away. I knelt before the device and put my palm on it, letting the vibrations rumble up my arm. There was a perfection to the rhythm. Fingers grasped the back of my head. I tried to react. I ordered my hand to move away from the speaker. Nothing happened. The unknown attacker shoved my forehead into the speaker's blunt metal corner. I blacked out. Interview 3. The man who introduced himself as Stavros. In summary, there were 3 things that the abandoned homes appeared to have in common. The presence of the odorless gray oil found in a room with a TV turned on, the unexplainable cold, a flyer advertising a new extreme haunt that was opening in the area. For those that have never heard of an extreme haunt before, it's basically a haunted house that goes well beyond the typical harmless scare tactics to induce the desired adrenaline high. Physical and psychological safety be damned. If you need an example, Google McCamey Manor. No address, no attached pictures of what the event would entail, simply the promise of a mind-bending, no-holds-bar thrill ride, a phone number for any intrigued daredevils to call, and a low-resolution image of a man's face. That's what I've been told, at least. I wasn't allowed access to a copy of the advertisement, as it's been deemed a biological weapon akin to anthrax, an agent that appears benign at first glance and thus is easily disseminated through the mail. Instead, my handler gave me the phone number it listed and a new role to play. No one answered the first time I called, so I left a message. Hello, my name is Vikram, redacted, and I work for Redacted magazine. I was hoping to do an article on your haunted attraction, or whatever you'd call it. A haunt? A haunting? Anyway, give me a ring back if there's still some available slots. Thanks. Oh, don't let me forget to ask, does the haunt have an official name? There's nothing listed on the ad. A man with a raspy, waterlogged voice called me back 15 minutes later. He sounded surprised to be speaking with me. Sure, I can set up the haunt for you. Just gimme, I don't know, about a week. Could you provide me with a more detailed explanation of the event? I asked. You know, for the article. He chuckled. Absolutely. Well, it's basically the bastard child of a haunted house and an Airbnb. All the scares happen within the walls of a rental property, though that's not to say you won't get a shiver or two from something happening outside the home. It's also not just a haunt house. It's more than that. It's a performance. It's a game. You could even consider it a rite of passage, in some respects. His stream of consciousness trailed off, leaving an uneasy quiet in its wake. Oh, I see. Very modern. A new take on an old classic type of thing, I replied, feigning discomfort at his admittedly strange statement. Yes, that's a good way to put it. I do apologize for the, disjointed explanation. I'm not used to providing an explanation off the cuff yet. You're actually our first customer. We weren't expecting someone with your stalwart disposition to respond to our advertisement so soon. Don't get me wrong, I'm excited. We're all excited. It's just, most people seem to see our ad and, run for the hills, never to be heard from again. The discomfort I felt after hearing that statement was, in comparison, real. His very on-the-nose word choice made my heart race. Well, I think I can understand that. I wouldn't exactly label myself stalwart, though. I just want to keep my job. Anyway, let's tie up the loose ends. Remind me how to pay you, when to arrive, and what exactly you're calling the attraction. Oh, and you mentioned it was a game, or at least game-like. Is there a prize for winning? 8 p.m. on July 17th should be perfect. I'll request that you have someone drop you off at the listed address. This property is embedded within a rural neighborhood, and they've asked that we keep the street clear of unnecessary cars. Moving on to your other queries. Yes, it's a game, and a simple one at that. Stay the whole night and you don't lose, but there's no way to win. And there's no prize for making it till dawn. There are penalties for losing, however, which brings me back to your last question. The haunt is called... I can't remember what he said next. It was 2 words, I think, and it took me aback, startled me somehow, to the point where I nearly dropped my cell phone. Something folly, or maybe someone's folly. In the end, the name doesn't matter. Whatever it was, however it affected me, it didn't change the outcome. I still went. Couldn't help myself, I guess. The night of July 17th. Continuation. When I awoke, I was being hauled up the porch steps by my wrists that led to the front door of the haunt. I could no longer hear the singing, but my ears were flooded with the sound of the clattering masks. A myriad of identical, joyless faces greeted me as I peeked my eyes open. I quickly slammed them shut, hoping the person in the black fabric didn't notice. My mind screamed for me to flail and thrash and fight, but I kept my cool. Both of their hands were clasped tightly around my wrists. I wasn't in a position to fight. Playing possum gave me an advantage. It wasn't exactly easy to feign dead, however. No, it took nearly every ounce of composure I had to maintain the facade when I heard that cellar door creak open. As my shoulder blades thudded down the stairs, the temperature in the air plummeted. Felt like I'd been thrown into a pile of snow buck-ass naked. I could not calm my shivering muscles, which caused my internal panic to rise exponentially. Still, my captor did not seem to notice. My head bounced off the floor, the impact feeling more like dirt than concrete. A shimmering glow knocked against my closed eyelids, begging for entry. They dragged me across the floor a few steps. Then, they stopped, but they did not let go of my wrists. Instead, in a low, waterlogged voice, they started chanting, "Greater than God, worse than the devil. Wealth of the poor, dearth of the rich. Drink this in and bring us night. Greater than God, worse than the devil. Wealth of the poor, dearth of the rich. Drink this in and bring us night. Greater than God, worse than the devil. Wealth of the poor, dearth of the rich. Drink this in and bring us night." They let go of my arms and lifted my head. The shimmering glow became brighter. This is it, I thought, now or never. I opened my eyes to find my face was inches away from a TV screen, playing only static. In one swift motion, I swung open my jaw, twisted my head, and bit down on their hand. The taste of cotton and blood filled my mouth. They cried out in pain. I sprang to my feet. In the process, my cheek grazed the TV screen. That brief touch inexplicably tore a piece of flesh from below my right eye. I watched in horror as the skin and the blood submerged into the screen. Then, I sprinted up the cellar stairs, an assortment of dead faces observing me go. Thankfully, adrenaline is a hell of a painkiller. The searing agony of that injury really didn't kick in until I was at least a mile away from that godforsaken house, with dawn building over the horizon. This afternoon took me a full 12 hours to find my way home. Locating the interstate turned out to be more difficult than I anticipated, and I also collapsed in some tall grass for an unplanned nap around noon. Eventually, though, I made it back to my front door. As I inserted the key into the lock, relief swept over me like a tidal wave. The temperature of the air inside my home soured that relief in an instant. It was absolutely freezing. All the cardinal signs were present. The TV was on. The gray oil was everywhere. I even found the advertisement lying ominously on my living room table. The department certainly didn't lend me a copy. To make matters worse, I recognized the face in the blurry picture. Same as the masks, same as the mannequins. In a fit of panic, I ran around my home, not even sure what I was looking for until I found it. There is a rack of women's clothes in my closet bedroom, even though I live alone. There are 2 cars parked in my driveway, and I don't recognize one of them. Have I forgotten someone? I'm starting to hear the singing again, so I don't know that I have much time. But take this warning to heart. I think his face is like a virus. That's why I can't risk describing it. I'm not sure how to properly arm you against it. But realize that if you see it, if your eyes linger on it for a bit too long, you will be erased.